Greetings, everyone. Here we are, our first class of 2025. I post these classes every single Friday right here on the YouTube channel. This week, we are talking about paganism and the plant spirit path. I know that term paganism ruffles a few feathers, even within the communities that we would call pagan. So I want to start with just a wee definition, right? We'll unpack what this term means. I just use it as a shortcut. I don't take it too seriously the way that a lot of people do. But essentially, when we talk about paganism, it is a loose defining term for me that is interchangeable with other terms like heathenry and animism. And they're all just ways that we can describe nature centered, land engaging, non escapist life ways, perspectives, and practices. Um, it can be easy to say that a pagan tradition also needs to be pre conversion or pre Christian, right? But that is not always the case. Things are generally a little more complicated than that and a little more nuanced. And I have come to learn over the past several years that the need to distinguish what is Christian from what is pagan is really only a huge deal in America. People in other countries, in Scotland, Ireland, Wales, England, don't take it as seriously. Like, we understand that traditions, arise together, they mix and mingle. Syncretism is part of animism. And so when I say pagan, I don't mean everything that's not Christian, right? Or everything that's not Muslim, and as the case may be, depending on where in the world we're talking. But it is, ancient, land-based, nature-centered, animist, and life-affirming, right? When I talk about paganism, I mean traditions that are not escapist. They're not defining nature as an illusion or a trap or a test. They are not defining particular places in other dimensions or in other physical places where we are all trying to get so that we can get away from here. That's not it, right? We are here. This is where we go, and at least for now. So that's what I mean when I say paganism. And again, you can use all kinds of different terms. There are heathen folk I know that hate the term pagan but love the term heathen. There are pagans I know that love the term pagan and hate the term heathen. There are animists I know that, while they very much engage with neo-pagan and reconstructionist movements, don't like those terms either. So you can do whatever you want. Choose your own adventure. Where that leads us in this discussion about plant spirit path is, and this is why that distinction of, what paganism is in this context is important, is the plant spirit path cannot and does not exist in a vacuum. It will always be informed and influenced and propelled forward by the cultures and the folkways in which it exists, right? There's no way for us to practice this sort of sterilized, blank slate plant spirit path. It's just not possible. We will use the language that we speak. We will use the mythology, the traditions, the celebrations, the heroes, the deities, the festivals. All of these things will play into everything we do, including plant spirit path work. And because of that, I say that pagan traditions have always and will always inform the plant spirit path, especially the way that I practice it. So, what I want to talk about today is 10 ways in which these loosely defined pagan perspectives and practices influence the plant spirit path as I practice it and as I teach it. And I think that most of you will find resonance in this, right? Again, even if you are somebody who does not even consider yourself one iota pagan, maybe you are adjacent, maybe you're doing a little folk Catholicism, maybe you're into a cult of one of the saints, maybe you're practicing witchcraft and don't identify as pagan, all that's fine. I think that you'll still be able to go through these 10 points and see your own practice in them. So I use that term pretty loosely, pretty broad spectrum as a blanket way to shortcut the conversation, right? To make it easier. So the first thing is that cosmology is always going to influence the plant spirit path. What is the universe? How is it arranged? What is life? How does it work? Where do things come from? By what means are they sustained? Where do they go at their end? Cosmology generally gets limited to, how is the cosmos arranged? How is the universe put together? What's above us? What's below us? What's hidden from us? But I also think about it in terms of where do we draw vital force from? Where do we draw life from? And what happens at death? And what is the living journey all about? So, whatever tradition you are part of, any kind of pagan, any kind of anything, your belief around cosmology, your experience around cosmology will influence your plant spirit path work, right? Because it will tell you the position that plants hold in the universe and how working with them can influence the way that you dovetail with how the cosmos is put together. There's no way that they can be separated and remain effective. That's the point that I'm trying to make. The other thing, point two, is who plants are in the grand scheme of things in your tradition, right? Some traditions will say that plants are things, they are non-sentient commodities here to serve humans, that they were put here by a singular creator deity to be used by humans. Others will say that plants are arcane spirits, sovereign beings filled with consciousness and wisdom, capable of kinship. And so here's an example of whatever tradition you come from is going to dramatically affect how you work with plants. Whether you see plants as living, conscious beings or things is going to change the trajectory of the plant spirit path for you in massive ways. So pagan traditions, animist traditions will always influence our plant spirit path work because they inform how we experience what plants actually are or who plants actually are. The next point would regard guardians and stewards of plants. So maybe in the tradition that you practice, there are deities, gods and goddesses who have a particular area of interest or an area of influence that overlaps with plants, right? In that case, you would have access to this personality, this deity, who could give you deeper teachings, who could initiate you into the things they know, who could work with you as a teacher or as a mentor and a guide. Maybe there's a particular hero whose mythology involves plants, or a particular saint who worked with plants. Here's an example of how our work with the plants, the way we walk the plant spirit path, will be slightly different because we've brought in these other personalities who help inform and give depth and give initiation to our work. And that will change everything, right? Again, if you're trying to do all of this with blinders on in a vacuum, with no influence from any of your cultural or spiritual traditions, it's going to be very lackluster, right? It's not going to have the depth that we want. Then we would consider the cause and the nature of disease. And yes, all spiritual traditions have some input, have some theory, have some belief about what disease is, what causes it, how it should be dealt with, right? You might think of, various pagan traditions having aspects of the Ilfa, the elves, right, or the fae, the fairies, having an influence over human health, or taboos, rules that certain people aren't supposed to break. And if they break those things, then they make themselves susceptible to illness. Maybe particular deities can cause illness, or other people in the community, like witches or sorcerers, can cause illness. And so we use these perspectives to help understand herbal medicine, to understand how our ancestors of those traditions, of those cultures, would have approached working with herbs to reconcile how they saw disease happening, right? We have to sort of try to put ourselves in their shoes, see what they might have thought, and then bring all of that into the moment and see how it applies to our life in the here and now. Then we have folklore. Every tradition, every culture, especially every pagan, pagany animistic tradition has folklore around plants. And this is one of my favorite things because it's one thing to sit and study the botany, the morphology, the clinical data around plants. It's another thing entirely to be gifted a story about the plant, a way the plant shows up in folk tales and mythology, stories about the plant themselves, right? This is very important and is not possible that you can hear some folkloric tale about a plant and not have it influence your relationship with that plant, right? You will fall more deeply in love and more deeply in kinship with every plant that you hear these ancestral stories about, right? It helps us to know them better, right? It gives us more access to who they are as people. The next thing is how to approach and petition plant spirits for health and for help. Every tradition is going to have rituals, protocols, regulations, taboos around how a plant is approached. When can they be, what rituals can we bring them into? How should the prayer be put together? What offerings should be made, right? What deities or spirits should be propitiated? Lots of, the stuff from old English, Anglo-Saxon paganism, for example, would say when you are working with the plants, with the herbs, you are in the domain of the Ilfa, of the elves. And so you can't just come into a space only thinking about the plants. You also have to think about the non-physical beings who live in that space and interact with those plants and maybe propitiate them. And then you have to consider their hierarchy, right? So there's layers to all of this work, which we can go into as much as we want, right? Which is always good. Harvesting, every tradition is going to have rituals of harvesting. When is it okay to cut a plant? How should a plant be cut? How should they be gathered? When? By whom? With what hand? With what tools? With what tools should you never, right? This will always affect and influence our plant spirit work because it tells us how to behave respectfully in wild spaces. Even if that wild space is your own garden, right? It tells us as humans how we can enter into a space where we are a guest. We go out into a meadow, a forest, a garden where other beings live their entire lives. And this lore is telling us, don't just come in and hack and slash and leave. Come in as a guest, recognizing there's other animals, insects, and spirits who live here, and follow these protocols so that you don't offend any of them. Because coming back to maybe our fourth point, if you offend them, you may end up causing yourself disease, right? Because you pissed off one of the land wights or one of the spirits, and they maybe you got elf shot or something, right? And so now you're sick. And so we always try to behave accordingly, and our folklore around how to do that will inform how we do that. Then we have crafting medicine, right? Many of the pagan traditions talk about various ways of making herbal medicine preparations, how to do tinctures and elixirs, potions and extracts. And we don't often think about the medicine crafting part of this as being particularly spiritual or particularly mystical. We tend to think it's quite mundane and quite formulary and recipe in nature. But how often do we see in the stories around various pagan traditions? One that I could pluck out of the top of my head is, of course, the story of the goddess Ceridwen, right? And within that story, we learn how she gathers 365 herbs, puts them in her cauldron, how they are prepared by Wigwion Bach over the course of a year and a day, making a decoction, a strong elixir. Not that we're going to duplicate that, but there is insight into how medicines are crafted, with what intent, with what ritual, right? And then it can inspire how we make things in our own kitchen is very important. Then we have crafting charms. Lots of the pagan lore preserves many charms focusing on plants, and some of the lore written by Christians about pagan people saying the pagans do this thing inadvertently preserves some of our lore, and we have no shortage of that. We can thank people like Sir Reginald Scott and the Venerable Beda for inadvertently preserving a huge amount of pagan lore that we now rely on to reconstruct many of our traditions. So the way we do charms, the way we write the charms, particular galders, particularly sayings and recitations that have been written by our ancestors around working with plants. Not only can we use those existing charms, but they teach us how to make new ones. They teach us what the formula is, what the framework and the structure, right? Galder has structure. These charms have structure. These old ways of putting a prayer together to a plant spirit, there's a format, right? A refined format to them that we lean into these traditions to learn how to do that. Otherwise, we will be reinventing the wheel. And that is never good energetic ecology, right? To start from scratch something that has somehow survived and has been handed down to us. The last point, the 10th point, is empowering the practice that by having some kind of a cultural, spiritual, religious, ancestral, land-based, whatever root to the way that we walk the plant spirit path will dramatically change the efficacy of the work and the way that we relate to it, right? If your work with the plants is also rooted in the particular tradition of paganism you practice or the particular stream of folk religion that you follow, it will take on a depth and a meaning that far surpasses what you would have access to if you again tried to practice this in a nice little homogenized bubble, right? So we try not to do that because it's just not effective. We've never done that as a people, and when folks try to do it now, they get bored. It's very boring, right? And things just don't work as well. So this is important. So I think that some kind of rooted, grounded, connected spiritual perspective is important in all plant spirit work. And for folks who feel like they don't have that now, and you're watching this class and going, I would like some of that, please. I would like to sign up for some of that. One order of that, please. Here's two things you can consider. The first is look more deeply at whatever it is you are doing right now. What are you doing now? What is your spiritual path? What is your religion? What is your culture? What is the trad that you are initiated into? What are you doing now? What deities do you work with? Whatever. Look harder. It is not possible that you will not find everything we just talked about. You just have to have the eyes to see it. You have to be looking for it. Even in spiritual traditions that we might think would be totally divorced from any of this kind of stuff. Maybe you're thinking, oh, I'm a particular kind of Christian. There's no way I'm going to find any of this, or I'm a Muslim or whatever. You will find it. It's there, and it's there in abundance, right? You just have to look for it. So that's one part of it. And then maybe you don't have a tradition. Maybe you're not plugged into anything in particular right now. You don't really have anything to look at. You're not really feeling like you have any good books to crack open. When in doubt, look at what your most recent animist, earth-centered, nature-adoring, pagan-y ancestors were likely doing, right? So even if you have no interest in Anglo-Saxon paganism, Old English, Farnsidu, the old ways of England, but that's where your family's from, let's say. Start there. Look at Old English herbal charms. Look at Anglo-Saxon perspectives of healing and medicine and plant charms. And even if that's not where you end up building your hearth, if that does not become your hearth culture, your heart culture, it will kickstart things. It will get things moving. You will get the attention of your herb-wise ancestors. You will get the attention of people who can help you and send you to the next thing. So either you're already engaged and you just need to look harder, or you don't have any engagement and there's an opportunity for you to engage, right? It's very simple. You don't have to sign up for anything. You don't have to commit to anything. You don't have to join or subscribe to anything. You just look. You just say, what were my most recent pagan ancestors likely doing? And what were their sources? And where could I learn about that, right? And it will, I guarantee you, fire you up and get all of this going. So with that, we're going to wrap up this week's class. If you join our fantastic community over on Patreon, when I do these classes every single Friday, you also get an audio-only version. So instead of having to watch the video, which sometimes is just me talking, you can just download it, listen to it in the car, at the gym, out on a walk, whatever. We also have our monthly plant spirit journeys, our monthly advanced classes, recurring courses, book club, incredible online chat group, people doing all kinds of things, plus your opportunity to access apprenticeship content. So with that, well, thank you. Happy New Year, everyone. Happy 2025. Here's to another year, year 4 of doing these classes every single Friday. I can't wait to see where it takes us.